Hello and welcome to another episode of the As Yet Unnamed podcast. I'm your host, Soku, and today we have with me a returning guest, all the way from Melbourne, Australia, Stu. Stu, how are you?
Hey, how you going? I'm well. How about yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. Today we're going to answer one of the questions raised by a comment from Adam Peter on the old prediction video on the Ravnos Salubri and Tzimisce starters or pre-constructed decks. So Adam Peter said it would be interesting to see your updated thoughts when the release happens or when the reviews are done soon. So the reviews are done now. Release hasn't happened yet, probably in the next couple of weeks.
Any moment now.
Yeah, new toys for the new year. If you're seeing this before 2024. If you haven't watched the last video that we've been referencing, that video was us having sort of predictions of what the new Ravnos Salubri and Tzimisce pre-constructed deck would look like, just based on Stu's extended understanding of the lore and my limited ability to read Wikipedia and White Wolf's wiki. So today we're going to talk about how we feel about the new pre-constructed decks now that the full deck lists have been reviewed and the new cards have all been spoiled. So once again, welcome. You are here to listen to two grown men talk about their feelings of a card game, but perfect podcast for two. So let's talk about the Ravnos pre-constructed deck. The Ravnos pre-constructed deck, I think previously, Stu, you mentioned that the new symbol is nice, but it's also potentially a extra thing for people to get used to.
There's probably still some people who get annoyed that we don't have a little L or a T for December and Tzimisce right now.
Like 20 years, that was what, 20 years ago? But fair enough.
Vampire players have long memories.
That is true. And this actually isn't the first time the new symbol has appeared in a VtES card, or is going to appear on a VtES card. So I think it's appeared on a Gangrel card. Don't know why. It's something to do with like if Ravnos attempts an action against this card, it gets something or other. So,
Gotcha.
So that symbol's come up before.
There's a sneak peek.
Yeah, sneak peek. Sneak preview of a sneak preview. And I think one of the things I've noticed about the Ravnos Precon, and it's something that didn't cross our mind when we were doing prediction videos, because it's not come up in the 5th edition products as of yet, is that there is a very strong continued reference to Gehenna, which I think you mentioned in the previous video is the sort of the wrap up, the end of the world, end of the storyline, when just before, well, in the storyline it's meant to happen just before 5th edition, where I think he also mentioned ancient vampires waking, a week of nightmares, and well, Week of Nightmares is back.
Yeah, absolutely. So from a lore perspective, the Week of Nightmares and the demise of the Ravnos Antediluvian occurred in the late 1990s, which would have been at the time of the 3rd or revised edition of Vampire the Masquerade. And so that was only a short time before the Sabbat War and Final Nights sets were coming out. And so certainly it's very fresh in the minds of the designers at the time, LFJ, to include those sorts of things. Since we now move forward to the 5th edition of Vampire the Masquerade, the concept of the Ravnos clan having undergone some significant disruption, the death of an ancient vampire whose dreams and nightmares still haunt them no matter where they go, that's very much built into the lore of the new Ravnos clan. And so it's been really good to see that come up. There's a couple of cards I'm sure you'll be bringing up on screen in a moment, which do reference that. And of course, as you say, the Week of Nightmares card itself is back also.
Yeah, so we've got two cards that are clear reference to two new cards rather, but Visions of, I never pronounce his name, Zapathasura. I think that's the Ravnos Antediluvian.
It absolutely is, yes.
Yeah, so the art especially is very invocative of, Zapathasura awaking, and then, you get Ravnos in the background feeling the effects of staring into, I suppose, greatness, because that's their founder, their sire, or the source of everything that clan is. The other one is, well, the art isn't so much reminiscence of Gehenna per se, but the card is Visions of Gehenna. So, and it kind of ties in with Week of Nightmares, which is, so it's kind of like you get visions. I think this refers to, like you mentioned, perhaps both before and after actual Gehenna, where, just before the Thasura wakes up, the clan itself, the vampires in the clan itself, the kindred, have visions of something really bad's happening before they get superpowered. And I think also these visions might refer to like after Gehenna, where they're still getting flashbacks of what happened.
Yeah, for sure. For the Ravnos, the end of the world has essentially come, and they are struggling to survive in the aftermath. And so, from their stories are almost a post-apocalyptic story. Their founder is gone, their life or unlife has been turned upside down, and they are shifting through the shattered remains of what was once their clan. So it's really great to see some of those cards and see some of those themes. It'd be nice if all of them were Ravnos-specific, clan-specific cards, but understand from a game design perspective, you also want to make sure that cards are relevant for as many people as possible, so you can mix and match.
This is one of the things you mentioned before, where in the previous video, where Ravnos used to be very much tied to one or two very specific ethnicities and their stereotypes around those ethnicities. And it's nice to see there is a move away from that in both vampire names and as well as the art style, because you get a very diverse sort of kindred backgrounds, I guess, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah, I've been really impressed by the work that the Black Chantry team has done to really show a very diverse range of figures, body types, ethnicities, genders, you name it, and that's certainly carried on into the new starters. So yeah, fantastic to see. It'd be very easy to subconsciously perhaps go back to some of those older stereotypes, and as V5, as the role-playing game has moved on from those, really good to see that VtES has similarly moved on. But we haven't moved on from Week of Nightmares. We haven't moved on from Redux. We haven't moved on from Stealth Bleed. Well, we've added in Stealth Bleed now too, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. So, but like it was one of the things that you predicted, because it's, Obfuscate plus Presence is a very stealth bleeding sort of combination. Even if Obfuscate and Presence has sort of in the role-playing game has become sort of an amalgam for what was chemistry, in the card game, ultimately there are new cards that are evocative of that, but it's also really, you've got stealth and you've got payload with presence. It will be stealth bleed, and they do get their own bleed modifiers, which I think is good, because it used to be, if you're in presence, you could only get bleed modifiers, well, decent bleed modifiers, elevation, and a power of 1. So one is pseudo clan specific, and the other one requires you to be Anarch.
Yeah, I think I was going to say, I think one of the really interesting things that they've done in terms of keeping some of the flavour of the old clan discipline is the stealth reduction, which they've got in the new in some of the new effects. I think that's great to see, because of course that was a a smaller theme of chemistry cards before in the past. So there's a couple of cards that had that. And so to bring that back, I think, is a nice little nod.
Yeah, definitely. But they've also ticked the other box that you mentioned, which is having animalism around. It's going to inevitably make it a little bit too boxy. And I think they've managed to do it reasonably well here. A lot of the new animalism cards are not quite as, do one thing. It's situational. It covers multiple angles, which I quite like, and it also ties into the whole, their new background as Wandering Kindred. Something like Feral Hound, for me at least, makes it feel, especially with the effects that's semi-transient, it makes me feel like, the Ravnos goes around. It happened to pick up, there's this little stray that apparently looks like a cat, some people say. Stray dog that looks like a cat, and they can use their help for a little bit while they're in that town, and then when they move on, they probably need to either give the little pup some time to move with them or have to find a new pup.
Yeah, I think that's a great bit of card design. It's something flavorful. It's something balanced. It's a mechanic which is similar to, but not quite the same as some other cards. I think that is a really nicely done card. I'm keen for your perspective on Voracious Vermin as well. What do you think? How do you think that's going to go?
That is an interesting card. So there's clear equivalence to Canine Horde, both destroy equipment, both are in animalism. What is interesting is Canine Horde, because the alternate effect is not as impactful, like one range damage in animalism that has access to 8 from bats isn't quite the same as a straight up dodge with an additional strike on top of that. Sorry, that's a superior, but a straight up dodge is something that, is easier to chuck into decks. And it reminds me a bit of the whole, Blood Door versus Vessel, minion tap versus villain kind of interaction. So, like, you, in theory, both meant to serve a similar but slightly different purpose, and you want to include a mix of both of them. So that's my
agree. And also I'd say in the context of the other two starter decks, which we'll get to shortly, we have 6 from the Salubri, and we've got aggravated damage, hand damage from the Tzimisce. I think having a couple of extra dodges in the deck is a very fine idea for the Ravnos, that they can find a way around some of the combat mechanisms of the two clans that other people might start to play them with.
Yeah.
I think for me, Voracious Vermin is interesting because, I think I don't have the text in front of me. It's only destroys weapon as opposed to destroy equipment, I think.
Destroys weapons, you're right.
Yeah. So for me, that if it was equipment, I think we might see slightly more use. I'd love to see rats nibbling away at a Heart of Cheating or something like that. The other part for me, though, is when I go back to that conversation that we had so many months ago now, I think I said, sitting next to a Ravnos, you shouldn't feel safe. You shouldn't feel like your stuff is nailed down. And something like having Voracious Vermin in the deck, I think, is a really good way of doing that. You might be playing a Salubri deck with a weighted walking stick, and everything is hinging around that. And next thing you know, that stick isn't there anymore. Now, unfortunately, that's an additional strike. Doesn't have the first strike of Canine Horde, but that dodge provides some great use. There, you can dodge that weighted walking stick from the Salubri, and then you can nibble it away.
So, have you got any thoughts around the new vampires?
All of them look good. They look interesting. I was hoping for a little bit more, in a way. If I think back around the conversations that we were having if they could have more of that trickster feel, a bit more of the bluffing feel, a bit more of being dangerous to be around feel. I was hoping that they would put things on the line a little bit more. And a starter like this, you can insert those effects on the cards, but if you insert them onto the crypt cards, then that's a really good way of getting that flavour of the clan. These should feel like outcasts. These shouldn't feel like that they're part of any real establishment, except if they're using that establishment as a way of giving themselves a bit of backup just to make sure they see the next sunset. I think for me, there's a couple of potentially missed opportunities there, and I would have loved to have seen a few more flavourful specials. How about yourself?
You're right. I do think there is a little bit of missed opportunity to create them as outcasts, but I do think some of the abilities on the crypt cards do represent them fairly well in terms of being always on the move, not always. You can't just sit around. So cards like there is a new crypt card that will lock itself if it doesn't take an action. So
that was a good one. Yeah.
So you're always forced to take an action, and then some of it's more on the nose. You've got one that moves retainer around. So it's like he's like a courier, goes from friend to kindred to kindred and passing.
I suppose for me, when I looked at it, I looked at a bunch of different vampires that would easily slide into a ministry deck.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine from a game design perspective, because obviously you want people to be able to pick up a couple of similar clans and go, let's mash them together and see what happens.
Yeah.
But I just want to make sure that we don't lose the flavour of what it means to be Ravnos as part of that.
Yeah.
So it's certainly not too much a dig at the design team. I think they've done some really good work here. And my general sense is, if we look at something like Fall of London, where the text blocks for text were getting a lot longer on some of those vampires, it's many times it's easier just to give it a nice clean structure. I think they've done a good job. So yeah, you're right. A couple of flavorful abilities here and there, but overall would have loved it a little bit more. Easy to overdo.
Very easy to overdo. We did mention this in that previous video as well, that it's not necessarily always very easy to translate lore into a card game, because as you've just mentioned, it's a fine line to walk between making a card legible and useful, or rather relevant to the actual game itself, as well as trying to put lore into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, there's some cards in the past which have desperately tried to add in lore on a particular vampire and have made it an almost unusable vampire as a result. Toy, the Samidi, is a really good example.
Yeah, so I think the Ravnos deck overall, the design teams managed to do reasonably well in terms of both flavor and card effect. Some missed opportunities you mentioned, but I think all in all, pretty decent results.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. A good solid toolbox deck.
Yeah, and I think you've also very much fit most of the things in the prediction. So I'd say we're about 60% on this one.
I don't know. I said some crazy things, so I'm not quite sure.
So this would be a good point to move on to the next deck, which is the Salubri. So one of the biggest thing that's coming out from 5th edition is we're no longer, and Salubri is the most sort of obvious nod to this, where we're no longer having a main clan and an entry tribute clan as separate. So everything is one.
Yeah.
and you can see that in some of the effects. We can delve into it a little bit later, but some of the effects in the both crypt cards and the library cards, they're trying to do both what Bayer used to do as well as what Valerian used to do. What are your thoughts on this, I guess, remerger of main and anti-true clans?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that Salubri is the first one that we see like this. I think in the lore, the Salubri and Tribu were sufficiently distinct from the Salubri main clan on the basis that they had a different discipline. Valerian, as you mentioned, they were very different in numbers, which is why one was scarce and the other one wasn't. And so, yeah, for me, it's a bit of a shame. I always loved my Salubri anti, but I absolutely understand the decision to bring them together. I think it's a good call, and for me, the creation of anti-tribute clans as being essentially separate factions from core clans. That decision, which was made all the way back in 1996 with the release of the Sabbat, I think in retrospect was one of the more flawed design decisions that have been taken across the length of the game. Of course, at the time, that was the final set from Wizards of the Coast before the game went into torpor.
Mm-hmm.
And so they weren't necessarily cognizant of the long-term implications. But the fact that the game has never made that reversal, we had the chance in the Sabbat War, and we've had a chance ever since. That's been an issue. I think bringing it back in again now creates a really good space to go forward. For the Salubri themselves, interesting thing actually, there was in the lore up to 3 different groups of Salubri, depending on how you counted things. There was another group as well, the Wu Zhao, who were Chinese / Mongolian / other areas, and they never quite made it into the game, and probably for the best, because can you imagine 3 different Salubri clans? That would have been just daft. So there are certain decisions that were made to roll things in over time, and that's been good to see. I like it. I like the deck. The loss of Scarce, I'm a little bit sad by, because the lore in V5 actually emphasises how rare Salubri are, but I absolutely understand it. First off, I understand it from a game perspective. Scarce is just one of those rules that so rarely comes up that there's probably better ways to work around that. I don't think we're going to see True Bruja anytime soon. Megaraja have been wound up into the Hakata, however you pronounce it. So we're not going to see it anywhere else. It makes sense just to slowly retire and to sunset that particular keyword so that new players don't need to think about it. But it is a little bit annoying on the same way, because we still should be assuming that Salubri are relatively difficult to find, and yet we have a full crypt of them ready to go to hit you with their sticks.
Oh, that's a good point. So when we first were talking about the Salubri, you mentioned that their new discipline spread of Dominate Auspex and Fortitude calls a lot of parallel to the now defunct was it Ventru Anti-Tribru clan?
Ventru Anti-Tribru, yeah. Just a funny thing on that. My understanding is that, and again, lore nerds can at me in the comments here. My understanding is that the reason why they have Auspex is a book that came out called Player's Guide to the Sabbat, which set Ventru Anti-Tribru with a different discipline spread than the Ventru clan. They almost they went through all the different Anti-Tribru. My understanding is that was actually an error. They actually were always supposed to have presence. And then what happened is in later books, when it came out, they talked about them sometimes having presence, sometimes having Auspex. And so they tried to almost repair back from that oopsie moment that they had at some point in the mid-1990s in the book. So the fact that Ventru Anti-Tribru have become such a distinct faction, different from the Ventru proper in VtES, is in many ways just because of this little historical oversight and the way in which those three disciplines work together in VtES as distinct from VTM. So now, with our assumption being eventually anti-drive are no longer, long live the Salubri as the new grinder archetype. They've got intercept, they've got damage prevention, they can hit you with things. They're good to go, really, aren't they?
Yeah, and the new deck is really like the cards in the new deck really leans into it. Do the new cards really evoke Obeah and or Valerian now that both are supposed to be amalgams?
The Salubri deck, by focusing so much on that grinder archetype, I thought I was going to really struggle with the deck, but I've got to say I love it. I love the synergies between some of the effects. I love the new archetypes, and I think some of the vampire special abilities, which no doubt we'll get into shortly, that is flow so nicely together, and they do it in a Salubri-like way. The way in which that they can, heal or top up blood or prevent damage feels Salubri-ish to me. Whether or not it feels like Obeah and Valerian is something else, and people who are very much into some of those very specific effects there might be a little bit annoyed with some of them, but I think they've done a great job. And also, just for what it's worth, something like Guardian Angel just has a nice sort of Salubri-like feel to it, So I think even adding certain cards like that in, of course, it's got damage prevention, it's got intercept. Of course, it should be in a deck like this, but also at the same time, I think it's got a really great feel to it. And I would compare that to something like Archon Investigation in the Ravnos style. Archon Investigation makes sense from a design decision why they put a card like that in there.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if the Archons were going to be investigating anybody, they'd be investigating the Ravnos and burning the Ravnos.
That's true. But sometimes, you have to step away from thematics just to...
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
I was just going to say, reflecting back on the Salubri, I think both you and I both did think that we'd have a deck that would probably have some sort of grinder archetype style pieces with that dominate fortitude or specs combination is just so good.
Mm-hmm.
But they also are the sorts of vampires who are happy to throw themselves in people's way, happy to help allies. I think that all that flows quite nicely, and I think they've done a good job there. That said, some of the more wacky thoughts that we were talking about last time around is, wouldn't it be great to see something themed around Golconda? That's always been a really big theme with the Salubri, and they didn't go there for this time. I'm okay with that, but it was really, there could have been an opportunity to open up a different type of deck archetype. If I think about what the deck is doing, that classic grinder deck, which has been around for so many years in VtES, is not yet in the new V5. And so this is going to be something new for those newer players coming into the game. So it might not be quite as exciting for us older grey-haired grognards, but for newer people, then this is really a chance for them to see a deck like that in action without having to go for cards from 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. For me, though, again, it would have been really cool to see what can make a Salubri feel very different. I can't complain, though, because, as I said, I love the vampires and I think they've done a really good job. Does it feel weird being able to govern the unaligned down to a whole bunch of Salubri and have an army of this clan? Yes, that does feel weird. Does it feel weird that we have a bunch of vampires here who are far more robust and probably secure in their place on the table than a Salubri player should probably feel? Yes, that does feel a bit weird, but I think there's some really great design. I've spoken for a lot. What are your thoughts? What do you think of the deck?
No, it's great. I love to hear your thoughts on all of these. You mentioned that the new abilities to like prevent, to heal a little bit is not really quite what the diehard fans of Obeah Valorant might be keen on or might be hoping for.
I'd specify, are we talking Spirit Marionette fans or are we talking the everything else? Because those things are already there, but there's a lot of Salubri decks. Well, and actually, all right, I gave you the opportunity to speak, and I'm going to just start speaking again, so my apologies. I look at the Salubri deck, and I see a deck where there are a bunch of vampires whose abilities work really well together. You can say, I'm going to get that one out, then that one's going to come down to this one, that one's going to get out that one, and that feature is going to work with that feature, which is going to work with that special ability, and there's some nice synergy to it. And that's very distinct from, dare I say, a bunch of older decks with Salubri, which are tended to be a Salubri as a star vampire, using one or two cards ad nauseum, which doesn't necessarily capture the feel of the clan. And perhaps in many ways, dare I say, does this new deck actually capture that feel of the clan a little bit better than Saolot and 10 Spirit Marionettes?
That is a good point. It did used to make Salubri feel very much like not a clan, but more a Saolot deck.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. This new crypt, even though it kind of makes it feel like Salubris are more present in the current knights than they are in the lore, does make Salubri as a clan more. It feels more like a clan, basically. So it's what the old Salubri anti-tribute used to feel like. So they felt like a clan. They're not a they're not a superstar. Yeah. They had like one that almost was, but So I was looking through the cards. I do kind of feel like what the designers have done is, I could be wrong. I'm just spitballing. This is again a podcast of feelings. So I feel like they've done pretty well in terms of considering that there's a limited space to add new cards. You can, but it's not really feasible to have an entire new pre-constructed deck of all new cards.
Yeah.
So they've done pretty well in getting for me at least, a feel of Obeah and Valorant cards that are together. So Obeah used to be healing, Spirit Marionette aside, and Valorant used to be a little bit of prevent, but very much smash things. And having cards that are like, I prevent for someone else is, I feel like, sort of a reasonable mix of both giving blood or life to someone else and also for preventing. So instead of just straight up say, here, you have some blood, have some life, it's don't lose blood or life instead. I think from a game point of view, that's great because you're not adding more things to a table in a game of diminishing resources, which is what the game is. But you're saying, we can slow the loss of resources. So it feels more resource management than, how good are you at just gaining more resource than the game's actually meant to be.
Sure. Are there any missed opportunities from your perspective with the Salubri deck? Were you looking for, Martha's Resilience or something like that coming back in again? Were you hoping for a particular janky combo of old cards?
So there is a card that I was hoping to be in the precon, and because there is also a crypt card, I don't remember the name off the top of my head, that works with said card that I think would have leaned very well into the whole redemption sort of the side of the Salubri, which is the Master card Golconda in a piece. So the way Golconda Inner Peace is worded, it is both a invitation for redemption as well as a punishment for rejecting redemption. And
Yes.
there is a crypt card out there that lets you take Golconda back to your hand when it is cancelled. And I was kind of hoping there might be something similar in the new Salubri, a crypt card or a action or I don't know, a master card that stays in play that does have that same sort of feeling, or even something similar to the Garibaldi Muci Museum, where if you got an NR, you can spend resources to retrieve card, and I was hoping you get something to do with Golconda here, which would have been
that would have been nice.
Yeah,
maybe there's a as we move past starter decks, and I think there's been some discussion around what comes next after we get the next batch of starter decks, plus then we have our back decks. What comes next for VtES? It'd be great to see some add-on sets. You buy a starter, not necessarily like New Blood or First Blood decks, but perhaps a mix of 100 odd cards that you could then splice into a couple of different thematic starters. So you could that's a really good opportunity to say, well, if you've got the Salubri deck or perhaps this other deck, here is a redemption angle, a Golconda angle.
It would also be interesting to see something like that that's tied to a new bit of lore, something similar to like the Fall of London, but instead of all new cards, a handful of maybe say 60-40 or 70-30 split between new and old new cards, and just a pile, right? Because sometimes you just want a pile of cards.
Yeah.
So I would definitely love to see that. Look at us making predictions in a recap.
We'll come back in another 12 months. Wrong game. So in terms of the Salubri piece, just to wind back on that one, I think they've done a solid job. I think in terms of our expectations of what we'd see in there, putting aside the more left field concepts and putting aside the fact they removed scarce, where some of our conversation went, I think we're pretty close, right? It looked like a classic grinder archetype, and that's what they've given us.
Yeah. I think it would be hard to have missed the grinder call.
Yeah. Look, just because it was a really obvious choice, we're still accurate, okay?
True.
Don't take this away from me. An easy VP is still a VP.
That is true. Right, next up is the Tzimisce pre-constructed deck. So they're definitely not the old clan Tzimisce. Thank God for that.
Definitely.
I don't think we really want to go down the rabbit hole of another it was aliens.
Yes.
Feel
apparently Tzimisce came from people reading Dracula and then reading Necroscope. There was a series called the Necroscope series. I'm quite serious. It was like, let's make vampires like this and add them into the mix.
Well, he gave us a whole new clan, so can't complain there. It's still a win in my book.
With the most unpronounceable name ever.
You did mention in the predictions video that in the new lore, I think maybe not just in the new lore, but it's always kind of been there that Tzimisces are meant to be like dragons. The hoarding bit of it, the coverting things bit of it, and I do feel that with this pre-constructed, that isn't really evident. it feels more like they're monsters than anything else. There's a lot of there's a lot of going back to, hey, cosmetic surgery.
Yeah. I think there was some really good opportunities for. I think I mentioned Farm Mastery, Grave Robbing, Dominate Kine as dominate cards which had a nice Tzimisce feel to them. Instead, we get Govern, Foreshadowing, Destruction, and Deflection, which are all good cards, don't get me wrong. It's also very straightforward. And their Dominate module, look, Govern is in, I love the new artwork, etc., etc. I love the new artwork for Foreshadowing, too, for that matter. But they have appeared so many times now in the V5 meta. I think this would have been a fantastic opportunity for something a little bit different.
Yeah, the only card that's in the pre-constructed deck that's very, very close, I guess. It's not even really that to the whole, don't touch my stuff. This is mine. Don't touch my stuff. It's really just one with the land. But then it doesn't make you feel like, that scene in Hobbit where they touch small stuff and he just went ape on the town and everyone. Yes. This is more like, I've grabbed a bunch of Smaug's gold, and Smaug is like, I built a wall and stop you from leaving, and then if you walk around the wall, sure, just call it.
I think, look, again, it's a fine deck with fine cards, and I think it's going to play really well. Mm-hmm. They just went in a different direction. I got a little bit confused. Well, okay, so first off, stuff I like. Wargulls. Hey, Wargulls are back. That's great. And we've got a new Wargull as well. I think an ally deck is an important archetype. I think adding Piper in there is a really cool choice. And so to see cards like that in a deck like this, bravo. That's great. That's going to create a nice bridge between the classic fan and the new fan of this clan. And we'll create something a little bit different for V5 players who haven't come across those decks. And my commiserations to all those new fans of the game who've never seen a Wargull deck before. It's going to hurt. I don't know why they're the breeding deck. Is it Child of the Revolution?
Yes.
So that seemed, again, great card, great art. Not quite sure why them. There wasn't necessarily anything around the lore of the clan that spoke to, from my perspective. So we have now an ally deck with some aggravated damage, some additional strength, and governs and foreshadowings for the oust.
Yep. One thing I did not expect was for them to be Anarchs. I might have misinterpreted the lore. I kind of thought that they're less likely to be, I guess, personally aligned with any sort of political ideology. It's all more along the lines of, this works for me. I can make use of this, so I'll call myself. I'll put on the name tag, but still me.
I'm fine for them to be Anarchs. I think making them Barons might feel like a little bit of a stretch too far, because my reading of the lore, my reading of the books at least, I didn't get the strong indication that they'd been in that sect for long enough, or actually cared deeply enough about the politics to have those positions of power. But I was fine with them being Anarch, but they should feel like almost Anarch is secondary to their identity.
I kind of suspect what it is the influence of what Tzimisce used to be in VtES, right? They used to be, because they were in the lore, like the spiritual leaders of the Sabbat, so they had They had your cardinals, your archbishops. So they've always been sort of this wallish with titles kind of archetype sort of style, and I think some of that comfort, if you will, has bled into the design. So very much the whole. I think they should still have titles. What's a good way of? Of the Sabbat's not a thing yet in VtES. You'd be hard pressed to convince anyone that the Tzimisce are now Camarilla and have princes. Yeah. So I think Anarch with Barons was the way to go, and then call back to a wallish kind of combat-y kind of deck also means that there's a lot less of the hoarding bit and a lot more of the monster side of things, stuff and war ghouls and whatnot. So I kind of suspect that was the reason why we're seeing some of these, and I also suspect Child is just there because Child is new, and you have to. Well, you don't have to, but it's a really good idea to put it somewhere, in another deck that is not just, I don't know, another Bruja or something similar.
I think having the aggravated damage, if I think about the number of clans who got that currently within the V5 meta, it makes sense for Tzimisce to have some of that. Obviously, they've got the Protean, so that makes sense. The combination of aggro poke plus a bit of additional strength means that they hit, perhaps a little bit harder in some ways. They don't have the massive amounts of prevention that you'd see in a Gangrel deck, which might have that similar sort of pattern of aggravated damage with a little bit of intercept. But I must admit, I didn't find... look, the combat module is fine. I just didn't find it particularly compelling. I think it's a really interesting deck. I'd be happy to play it. I love some of the new artwork on many of the cards. I think a little bit similarly to the Ravnos. I think that there's some choices that they could have made in either special abilities or card design, or even card selection, dare I say, that might have played up or emphasised certain aspects of the archetype of what it means to be Tzimisce a little bit more.
One of the things I found...
I'm not necessarily saying that I was expecting, 3 Haven affinities or anything like that in the deck, but and probably for the best that we didn't get 3 Haven affinities in the deck. But that sort of flavour of don't you dare take my stuff, that sort of flavour of when you come to me in my home, you're going to be in trouble. But it wouldn't have taken too much effort, I think, to have turned that dial a little bit.
Would have been interesting to see, I guess, a different sort of feel to the new clans. Would have made them again. Don't get me wrong. It's a good deck. It's got some really strong new vampires. It has to, because this discipline spread is new to Tzimisce. Some of the new cards are great. They definitely have a home in multiple different decks and deck archetypes. It's just sometimes, I guess, it would have been more exciting to have a different feel, a deck that does something janky, something cute. Tzimisce, cute is not really a Tzimisce thing.
I was going to say it's probably best that Dan and Hugh and the rest of the Black Chantry team aren't going for janky and cute, right? They're going for... So with all this said, after all this discussion that we've had, thank you for building a reliable, dependable, interesting-looking decks with some great art.
Oh, for sure. 100%.
If you listen to all of our suggestions, it would have been a mess.
That's true. I think...
Look, I suppose reflecting on all 3 of these, Ravnos, Salubri, Tzimisce, when someone new comes to the table and they pull out one of these 3 decks, it should feel different. Obviously, not too different that you don't know what the cards are doing or how it's working, but each of them should feel like it's got a real flavour to it. It should feel like it's out on the edges, because each 3 of these clans are out on the edges of Vampire Society, all in different ways. It should feel like it's not relying on, when we look at those Camarilla starter decks, they don't care about titles, they don't care about, your votes, they don't care about your structures and your hierarchies. They're just there to make trouble and burn your stuff down and do a whole bunch of different things in a bunch of different ways. I think that they've done a very good job making some really good decks here, which all feel quite different than the core ones. Could they have gone further in some of those design decisions? Yeah, I think they probably could have. But I'd be more than happy to play any of these 3 decks, perhaps more often than I would the core 5.
So here's my question, right? If the pre-constructed decks, or if the powers that be created pre-constructed decks that were janky and cute, wouldn't that mean that I say we loosely, mainly you, will no longer be able to build cute and janky peripheral decks, because then peripheral becomes mainstream?
Oh, I'm fine with that, because you got to remember I build decks really badly. All of this is there's no. I'm fine. Look, I actually think that when I think about all the different archetypes and sub archetypes of deck design, I think they're doing a really good job of showing the different flavors. So you have had allies appear beforehand, but the Tzimisce deck gives you an ally deck that looks a little bit different. The Salubri deck gives you that grinder archetype, as we say, which is different from a Bruise Bleed deck, but close enough to it that people can get a feel for what that looks like. And to wall decks as well. And we've seen, obviously, intercept cards beforehand. And if I can look back at the Ravnos, the fact they've got stealth reduction in there, that is something new for the meta, for VtES 5th edition. And so I think that they've got some really good things in there. So, look, there are decks out there every day that are way jankier than mine. They are just better and win more tournaments. Mine are only janky because they're not reliable, right? I think all of these have got ousting power. I think all of these, in a few years' time, we can look back at those and say, yeah, they're good decks. They all go well, and they all feel distinct and they all feel different. I would have liked some changes, but overall, I think the team's done a pretty good job.
Definitely, 100% with you on that. So
yeah, now when it comes to Sabat, I'm really interested to see what they do with Sabat, but that's a completely different conversation we're going to have.
Are you saying there's another video where you're coming on as a guest? Okay, so based on these overall thoughts that you've got so far for the 3 pre-constructed decks, on a scale of 1 to 10, and I think we might cop some flack in the comments, but on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think we've got in terms of prediction versus actual?
Sure. Okay. So I think from a Ravnos perspective, I called out Week of Nightmares, or maybe you called out Week of Nightmares. There's a bit of the stuff about them being a nomadic group. Look, I think honestly the best we could probably give there is maybe a 6-ish out of 10.
Yeah.
And that might be more because I was mouthing off around all the things that they could possibly do, but I don't think that necessarily you get that bluffing, that sense of danger, that sense of really playing it close to the wire with being a Ravnos.
So 6-10 for Ravnos. What about Salubri?
Yeah. Well, okay. The fact that we pointed out the blindingly obvious. I think we have to go for that 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I reckon Salubri was very much a freebie for us.
Yeah. And I think that the two things that take us down is the Golconda piece and also the scarcity piece.
Yeah. And then, of course, last but not least, Tzimisce. I think this was an interesting one. I feel like we were kind of feel like, personally, I was hoping it wouldn't just become, Tzimisce 2.0, so wall and whatnot. It did become a little bit like that. So I think that sort of influenced our prediction versus actual.
Yeah. So I suppose, look, give us a 5, maybe not even. I think I was really hoping that they would use this opportunity to really recast what the clan could do or what it is. I'm not unhappy. I should clarify with starter deck, and I think, as I said, the War Ghouls and that ally component is a really good addition into it, because actually that does tap back into a particular archetype of Tzimisce, which we have seen before and which is quite popular and works really well. And so I think that was a really good choice, and it gives him a different feel. But I don't think we actually had suggested that was going to happen.
No.
That good. The thumbs up for the deck, thumbs down for our predictions.
So if you're watching at home or you're listening to podcasts, let us know if you think we've got our self-grading correct, or if we completely missed anything. And hopefully we'll be able to do a prediction video for the Sabbat decks when they're closer to release and or spoiler season. And once again, thank you very much, Stu, for coming on as a special guest for today.
A pleasure as always. It's great to talk to you. And if I don't talk to you beforehand, have a fantastic break over the festive period too.
Yeah. So if you're viewing this as it drops, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and Happy New Year, wherever you are in the world. And until next time, see ya.